Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here. The first thing I want to do is just a way of an introduction to myself and to Full Circle Funerals and to sort of how we've become a dementia-friendly organisation. I have a lived experience of caring for somebody with dementia, and when I started work at Full Circle in 2017, in the May of that year, I went to an event through Dementia Awareness Week, where I heard the information session that I'm going to give you this morning. And I found myself having an absolute moment, a light bulb moment of going, goodness me, this was my experience. And I hadn't really realised. There was lots of things I heard and were shared with me that I hadn't realised or known about when I was a carer. And it just struck me as, and I know you've all alluded to it a little bit this morning, that, you know, dementia is something that affects many people in the country, in the world, and that it may affect us in terms of whether that's we care for somebody in our professional capacity, in our personal life, or through friends who we know are supporting somebody. And the impact is huge. And this information session helps us to just understand a little bit more about dementia, how it affects our brain, and how we can support somebody to live well with their dementia. And to live well in their community and to live well at home. And I think I found it really, really helpful. So I went back to work the next day and said, oh my goodness me, I've just heard the most amazing thing. We should all be embracing this and encompassing this into our general lives, as it were. But as an organisation, what could we do? We work with people every day who may or may not have been touched by dementia. And if we as individuals, as dementia friends, or as a business, as dementia friendly business, we can know what is helpful to people, then we can help to make their time and interaction with us when making funeral arrangements, hopefully have a greater awareness and understanding and help them, because we know that. So we joined something called the Dementia Action Alliance, which meant our properties were looked at from a perspective of, if somebody was to come into them and they have dementia, how would they find that? What would their experience be? What do we talk about? How do we share the information? What do we as individuals need to know so that we can support somebody in the best way possible? And that has grown into sort of becoming part of Leeds age-friendly businesses across the city and dementia-friendly business across the city, and we sort of join their network in that respect. So that's how we've come to it, and there'll be a few things I kind of share with you along the way. We're going to I'm going to click through some slides, which will we're going to do a little bit of interaction together. So the first thing to say is that this is an emotive subject, and if at any point anybody wishes to step away, then please know that you can. That's absolutely fine. And if there's anything you want to talk about at the end that feels like either as a safeguarding thing or just something that you want to chat about, please do let me know. I do need to say I'm a volunteer to this, and I'm enthusiastic about dementia and supporting people, but I'm by no means a qualified professional in the area of dementia and dementia care. I'm a Dementia Friends Ambassador, which means I've had training to deliver this activity and session. I've got personal lived experience, but if you ask me something that I feel I can't answer, then I will be honest and say that's not something I know the answer to. We're going to use our chat boxes now, and just if you could just for me in the chat box, the first word you think of when you hear the word dementia, if you wouldn't mind just popping that into the chat box for me, that would be amazing. Memory loss, confusion, challenge, forgetful, yeah. And there'll be more than one word that pops into your head, I guess, but those are change of personality. Thank you. And do you think those words are when we hear the word dementia and we think of words that come into our minds, are any of those words, do you think, are they positive words? Are they negative words? What do you think they are? What's the kind of undercurrent or tone that they give? Yeah, you're all saying negative. Yeah, no, thank you for commenting. I really appreciate that. Absolutely. So the words that we think of, as you say, negative words. Sorry, my screen's now not moving on, so that's not very helpful. Just bear with me whilst it does that. Often memory, forgetfulness, confusion, lost. These are some of the words, and the words that we use, I guess, are how society views dementia. And there's like news headlines, well, that's in the paper, on the radio, on the television. The word sufferer is used quite a lot. Victim, agitation, aggression, all of those are, and as you've all sort of alluded for me a moment ago, is that they are very negative words, and that is that is how it is, and that's what the Dementia Friends are trying to do, is to change how society views dementia, and then changes that round to sort of not focusing on the negative particularly, but trying to think about the things that we can do that will feel more positive and perhaps more hopeful. So Dementia Friends is a social action movement that was established by the Alzheimer Society. It's a strand of its work, if you like. And it's been set up to increase our understanding of dementia and inspire action to help those who are living with dementia today, and to provide hope for the future. And by understanding what are going to be 5 key messages that I'm going to go through with you now, and making a commitment to a dementia-friendly action, the aim of the initiative is to try and improve our social awareness and understanding of dementia, and how we can support somebody to live well with their dementia in their community. So these are the 5 key messages that we're going to go on to talk about. And the first is that dementia is not a natural part of aging. Dementia is caused by diseases of the brain. Dementia is not just about losing your memory. It's possible to live well with dementia, and that there is more to the person than the dementia. When they say dementia is not a natural part of aging, what they mean is that just because we grow old, it doesn't mean that we will develop dementia. It also means that there are people, younger people, who can be diagnosed, who are diagnosed with dementia. And for though that's very rare, it does happen. There are approximately, or give or take, over 850,000 people in the UK with dementia, and that there are more than 42,000 people in the UK under the age of 65 with dementia. If anybody has seen the BBC's documentary, the Dementia Choir, they may have noticed that within that, the group of people within that programme, there were at least 2 individuals who were under the age of 65. And I thought that the programme itself gave a really excellent representation of the point that they're trying to make, that dementia is not a natural part of ageing. There was a lady who was 55, and there was a gentleman in his 30s. And it just helped, I think, to sort of make that point in a very kind of like, in a way that wasn't maybe necessarily overtly obvious, but for those of us who've had this training will have noticed that. And it's true to say that it's not that everybody who grows old will develop dementia. The second key message is that dementia is caused by diseases of the brain. So in the same way that our heart, our lungs, our kidneys, our liver may all be affected by disease or diseases, the brain is also affected by disease, and dementia is one of those diseases of the brain. If you want to imagine, and it's quite timely that we do this now at Christmas, if you want to imagine that your brain is a collection of thousands of fairy lights, so you bought your Christmas tree lights out to put them around the tree, and they're in that little bundle, tight little bundled knot that we've put them in January, ready to pack them away for the following year or for the next Christmas. And you go to plug in those fairy lights, and what you never quite know, do you, when you turn those fairy lights on, is if all of the bulbs will come on and all of those lights will be there, or sometimes those bulbs will dimmer or flicker, or maybe they might not come on at all. So your brain is a collection of thousands of fairy lights, and each of those fairy lights will represent a memory, a skill, and a function of the brain. Now, if you imagine that the dementia will and can affect those lights, they may cause those lights to flicker or to dim or to go off completely. And for each person that will happen to, it happens in a different order, and different lights are affected. So the dementia will affect those fairy lights in one way or another. And for me, when I heard that, that was a moment of going, goodness me, yes, of course, that would explain why on Sundays my mum was able to hold on to some of the things that we talked about or the things that we had done, and on other days she couldn't. And because it was those fairy lights in a particular part of her brain, for whatever reason on that particular day, were maybe not quite as bright as they were the day before, or over a passage of time they were flickering a little bit more, or over the passage of time that particular light went off. And that was a moment for me where, excuse the pun, it was a bit of a light bulb moment in my mind, where that would explain so much about what we experienced together. And helped me to understand what was going on for her and what was going on with her brain. And just like many other diseases, the healthy lifestyle that features regular exercise, a balanced diet, and not smoking, it can reduce your chance of developing dementia. So what's good for your heart is also good for your head. When you ask people what is dementia, they'll often say Alzheimer's disease, and that's the only dementia there is. I want to just explain that dementia is an umbrella term. It is a umbrella term that describes a collection of symptoms, and Alzheimer's is just one of those, one of the diseases under that umbrella. And you may or may not be aware of others, so such as vascular dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, and frontal temporal dementia. There's dementia associated with Parkinson's disease. There's dementia associated with Pick's disease, for example. And actually, there are over 100 different types of dementia. So I think as a society, we're used to saying Alzheimer's, and that's the one that we may just use that as a generic term. But Alzheimer's is a particular disease, and that is a dementia disease, but there are over 100 different types. And some person might have a mixed dementia. They might have two diagnoses. So they might have Alzheimer's disease and Lewy bodies. They might have Pick's disease and vascular dementia. It is possible to have two. There is dementia associated with long-term alcohol use or abuse, and there'll be other ones that people will not really be aware of at all. So my experience of this was that my mum's would have come under the umbrella of dementia. And again, I think part of my challenge when I was looking after her was that I didn't necessarily recognize that she had dementia, but I knew that whatever was going on, the condition that she had was affecting her brain, but hadn't quite really appreciated that we were under this umbrella term. And that was what was going on, and that she had one of the over 100 different types. And it's really important, isn't it, to know and understand which dementia we have, and that's because they will have different disease progressions. They will have different prognoses. Some of them, Alzheimer's, for example, has a stepwise deterioration, and vascular dementia has sorry, I've got this the other way around. Alzheimer's has a gradual progression, and vascular dementia has more of a step-like progression. And by understanding which disease it is we have and which condition it is we're looking at, then that helps you to understand what support you may need and how you might then need to go about getting that. So that's is that particular message there. The third key message is that dementia is not just about losing your memory. So if we think about what those fairy lights are doing, and they all represent a skill and a function of the brain, then we can anticipate that other than our memory, short-term memory or memory, what else does our brain control that could be affected by dementia? So could be affected that our motor skills could be affected by dementia. So by that, it might be that using a knife and fork could be difficult, or could become something a bit more tricky. Sequencing. So if you think about our lives, we live our lives really with routine, don't we? And we do things in a sequenced way of events. So for example, how we get up in the morning and sort of do our ablutions with brushing our teeth and washing our face and going to the toilet and getting dressed. That's a sequence. Making a cup of tea is a sequence of events, whether it's, where the tea bag, the kettle, the milk, the hot, how we do all of that is all a sequence. And if we are starting to have our sequencing affected by dementia, we will do things in a different way, in a different order that we're not very used to. That's quite subtle sometimes, maybe to start with, but then it might become slightly more obvious. Or it might be that when we get dressed, we put on two skirts and forget to put on a jumper or something like that. Changes in inhibition. So as somebody who might have been quite quiet or shy might now become quite outgoing. There might be a loss of filter in the words that we say and how we speak to people, or the words that we use. There's an example of a gentleman who was a professor, gentleman who was quite very gentlemanly, quite quiet, quite shy, didn't necessarily sort of give you the feel that make you feel uncomfortable anyway. And with his dementia and the changes in his inhibition, he would be quite vocal and share quite loudly his views on what he thought about things. So, for example, might see somebody in the street wearing something that he was like either a bit offended by or didn't quite like very much, and be like, well, what are they wearing that for, at the top of his voice, which, you know, might would be completely out of character for him. And then take people by surprise, and then maybe cause some comfort and make that feel very difficult when we're out together, socially together or something. Our visual perception can change. Now, this is quite an important thing that can change for people, that can affect how they then respond to situations. So when visual perception changes, for example, a carpet with a pattern on might look like a snake. The swirly pattern on a carpet might look like snakes. Shiny floors could look wet. A tablecloth that might have a pattern on it of fruit, for example, might look like the fruits in a fruit bowl and going and looking like it's a real fruit bowl. So picking out the fruit from the fruit bowl. When we're going out and about in the street and doing our sort of business, going to the post office or going to the bank, and you want to go into a shop, and you open up the door, and in front of you is a black mat. That black mat could look like a great big hole to somebody with dementia. And so they may not feel able and safe to go forward into the shop. They would want to then stop at the door and not be able to go forward. And that could kind of then become a fear and a worry and an anxiety and a frustration that might show itself as being quite flustered and getting a bit anxious and upset and not being able to move forward. If you're also in the situation where there are people coming around you or wanting to also go through that door too to get into the bank, and you can't move away from that because you're now starting to feel anxious, or you're with somebody who's starting to feel anxious and upset, then that becomes difficult. And as a society, we're probably not very, some of us aren't very tolerant, so we might be a bit sort of tutty or a bit like rude and say, you know, come and move through. If you, as somebody who has had this training and session and understands that this is what the barrier is and what the difficulty is, you'd be able to say to them, oh, do you know, my friend has dementia, that this is looking like a very scary black hole to them right now, so we're not able to come forward. Would you mind going in and asking if there's anybody there who could come out to us? And then you could have a chat with the person in the shop and ask if there's another way in. You might need to think about going back another day or going in differently and saying, you know, is there a way that we could come in that doesn't mean coming over this black hole because they're not able to come in? If as an organization you can look at your environment and think, oh, actually, this isn't very dementia friendly because that's a barrier to people to coming in, you could think about what carpets and mats and things you have down that then help people. Communication as well, you know, we might forget words, we might use different words because we can't find the words. So, for example, you know that keys, the car keys are on the table, and you know that they're keys, but you can't think of what that key is particularly for because you can't think of the word car. So that might become a little bit frustrating, and you can't think of what that is. We communicate in different ways, don't we? Like we have visual communication, so keeping your visual cues in line with your message or what you're trying to talk about, talking slowly and clearly, feeling comfortable to repeat the things that you've said. Don't use euphemisms because that's very confusing. You know, clear language is really important. This is important for us as funeral directors. If we're to sort of help somebody to understand that somebody has died, saying things like, oh, they've passed away, or they've gone on holiday, or finding another way to explain it that might feel as though that's sort of the kindest and gentlest thing to do, can actually be quite confusing because the use of euphemisms isn't necessarily very, very helpful for somebody who has dementia. So those are just some examples, I think, of, you know, our brain and our its functions and how that can be affected by the dementia. We want to talk a little bit about the fourth key message now, which is that it is possible to live well with dementia. And so the things that we have been doing, working, driving, socializing, having relationships, what we do and how long we can do it for will depend on our individual and particular circumstances. And living well will mean different things to different people. We're not saying that dementia isn't without challenges, but even with those challenges, there are things that people will still be able to do, and to be able to live well with their dementia. And on the Dementia Friends websites, there's some lovely little stories and videos about what living well means to people. So, for example, there's a gentleman who loves to play his guitar, and he might not remember how to make a cup of tea in his kitchen, but he can sit down and play you a fabulous tune on his guitar with no problems at all. You wouldn't think that dementia was affecting that at all. A lady who really enjoys her garden and can absolutely tell you everything there is to know about the plants in her garden. A lady who goes dancing with her daughter and remembering those footsteps and that coordination, that's what living well means to her. And how can we do, how do we do that? Well, it's about support and understanding, isn't it? And having an awareness about what somebody is able to do and what they can do and want to do as well. And we can help by, I've mentioned this a little bit a moment ago, sort of reducing listening and using clear language, our body language, reducing distractions. So perhaps turning down background noise, turning the radio or the television off and taking away that element of background noise, that can be quite helpful. With the use of aids, what they're talking about there is sort of if the written word is a little bit more tricky, then you could have signs that are in picture form. So, for example, showing where the toilets are, or other things that you might think, well, actually, if we had that in a picture form, that would be helpful for somebody to understand if we were struggling with words. And it's about treating people with dignity and respect, isn't it? Everybody, regardless of which illness or condition they have, has a life, has lived a life, or has stories and history and memories, and their stories and histories and memories are really important, and we should be treating everybody as we should be, with dignity and respect. The last key message is about that there's more to the person than dementia. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story that is a true story about trying to help us to see, what does somebody with dementia look like? Well, they look like any one of us, don't they? And in the same way that we look at somebody who might have diabetes or a heart condition or another disease or condition, we look at them as an individual and not at their condition first. So this story is about a lady who was a resident at a care home in the northeast, and it is a true story. And she used to constantly tap her fingers on every surface. So you won't be able to hear it, but I'm tapping my fingers away on a surface. So if you can imagine, that's probably becomes a little bit annoying to everybody, because she wasn't able to tell people why she was doing it, and they didn't know why she was doing it, but that was just something that she did every day, and she'd tap away on the table. And it probably was annoying not only to the staff and the other residents, but maybe to the visitors when they came in. And it's just, people didn't know or understand why. When she moved into the care home, there was no family in the UK who went with her to help her move in and settle in. So the care home didn't know her story about her life. But one day she had a niece who lives in Australia who came to visit. And the first question that the team at the care home asked her was, why is it that she does this? But unfortunately, she didn't know. In that moment of being asked, she didn't know what the answer was, so she wasn't able to tell them. They spent the afternoon together. They were sat chatting. You can imagine there was a cup of tea and the odd biscuit or two, and got chatting together. And through the stories, through talking about her aunt and her life, they worked out or realised that one of the things they discovered was that during the Second World War, she had worked at Bletchley Park, and she'd helped to crack the Enigma code. And that she'd been receiving the messages across in Morse code. So maybe instead of tap, 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 it was dot, dot, dash, because that is how at a point in her life she had been communicating with people. When they had this moment of realization about that's possibly what it was, there was this sort of moment of like everybody's attitude towards her changed. They saw her as a heroine. And the local papers came to do a story about her, which was then in the local paper. The scout leader read it, got in touch with the care home and said, my scouts are learning Morse code. Would we be able to come in and meet this lady and spend a bit of time with her? The care home said yes. They went in and they were able to ask her things, and she replied with them in her Morse code. And I don't know if anybody's heard this from me before. I do like to think that maybe the things that she said to them was, could you tell them to not put sugar in my tea, because I don't actually like sugar in my tea, or was able to tell them what her favourite TV programme was, or which newspaper she would like them to read to her, those kinds of things that she hadn't been able to necessarily communicate with her. If we think about what the impact that would have had on her as a resident in their care home, she felt valued and she felt happier, she felt engaged with, they were able to engage with her, and it was allowing her to live well with her dementia because of that change of interaction. And there are lots of stories like this around people's experiences where they've had this moment of realizing that somebody's particular behavior comes back to sort of part of time of their life and their story and their history. So for example, there's another one, a gentleman who was in a care home. He used to sit in the reception area, and he'd be sort of like, he'd sometimes get a little bit agitated with everybody when they were walking in front of him, and nobody really knew why. So instead of then going past and saying, "Good morning, Bob, how are you today?" and chatting with him, they would maybe find a different way, or maybe not make eye contact, or walk through faster. And it wasn't until somebody realized that actually, again, during the war, his role was looking after an area that was mined, and his role was to protect people from being hurt by the mine. So he would identify where they were, tell people not to walk over certain areas, and was therefore helping to save their lives and to stop them from being injured. In the care home, he was using that area became his area where there were mines, and he was trying to tell people not to go into certain places because he wanted them to be safe and not to be hurt. And when people had an awareness that this is what he was doing and what was going on for him, they would be able to say to him, "Oh, morning, Bob. Is it okay to come through now? Am I all right?" And he'd be able to say yes or no in terms of, making those hand gestures or gesticulations. And they would either be able to go round the area that he was worried about, or it was safe to go through. But that helped him to feel valued and engaged with, because people understood why he was getting upset. And he was getting upset because he was wanting to protect them, because in his reality in that moment, that was an area of his world, and that's where what he was trying to do. Dementia Friends is about turning understanding into action, and those actions could be keeping in touch with somebody with dementia, could be making twiddle muffs and handing those on to people who look after somebody with dementia. Twiddle muffs are, I haven't got one with me, but it's a woolen, like a Victorian hand muff, and it's got bits and things inside and on the outside that people can touch and play and twiddle with, and it just keeps those restless hands busy. You can let people know that the Alzheimer Society is here to help people, to support people who are affected by dementia. We could promise to never use the word dementia sufferer again. Going back to the beginning and talking about negative words, the word sufferer implies all of those negative things, doesn't it? If we talk about somebody living with dementia, then we're taking away the use of that negative word. And the British press have promised to not use the word dementia sufferer. And for the Alzheimer's Society, that's a big win, to know that in the press that they're not going to say, tell a story that is about somebody suffering with dementia, but it's about somebody living with dementia. And again, because I kind of am intuitive into this now, if I listen to anything on the BBC News, for example, they don't say sufferer, they say somebody living with dementia. And in the BBC Choir, that's exactly what they did as well. They talked about, somebody living with dementia. It might be fundraising, it might be putting a little money into the Alzheimer's Society collection pot whenever you might see one. It might be going online and seeing what they've got going on and seeing how you can get involved and help in some way. It might become, but just by being here today, you're becoming part of becoming a dementia friend and helping to turn this social action movement into action, if you like. So that's what we would hope would come attending today. So, dementia is not a natural part of aging. It is caused by diseases of the brain. It's not just about losing your memory. It is possible to live well with dementia, and there's more to the person than dementia. This is a bookcase analogy, and this is how dementia was described to me, about what's happening for us with our brains. And I want you to imagine that there's a bookcase that's as tall as I am, or as tall as you are, and to the right hand side of you, it's as tall as you are, and it's filled with books, absolutely filled to the brim with books. And on each of those shelves contain different layers of memories for you. So we're 80 years of age. The bookcase is as tall as I am, and it's absolutely full. Each book on this bookcase represents a fact or a memory. And my top shelf holds my most recent memories. So the things that I did this morning, having breakfast, getting the paper, walking the dog, whatever that might be. The books on my shoulders are the books from my 60s. So that might be my retirement party, my retirement whatever it is I did, whether that was volunteering, looking after grandkids, going on holidays, whatever retirement looked like. By my knees are the books from my 20s, so meeting my partner, getting married, first home, having children, whatever that might have looked like for me when I was in my 20s. And at my feet are the books from my childhood, going to school, my siblings, family life, family home, whatever that was like for me when I was a child. Dementia rocks my bookcase from side to side. It's quite a flimsy bookcase. It's not very sturdy. It's not very resistant to dementia. And as the bookcase starts to rock, the books that start to fall away first are the books that are my most recent memories. So those books at the top. So the things I can't remember are the things I had for breakfast this morning, going and getting the paper, walking the dog, a conversation on the phone with a friend, those kinds of things. As the dementia progresses, the books that then start to fall away are the books that come from further down my bookcase. So the books that then are my most recent memories become those memories from my 20s. So working, getting married, having children, first home. And if you think about those examples I gave earlier, for those people who were involved in the war, that's working at Bletchley Park or being a soldier. And that's why my reality in that moment is those things about using Morse code or protecting people for safety from the mines. So this is how the dementia has affected my memories and those facts that are in my brain. And those books have started to fall away. And the books that are my most recent memories are the books that are from much earlier in my life. So if I was living in my own home and I am living in my 20s, even though I'm in 2024 and I'm living in my 20s, my kitchen would look a bit different. And I go to make myself a cup of tea, and that might become maybe potentially a dangerous situation. For example, if I try to make myself a cup of tea by putting my kettle on the hob rather than plugging it into the electricity and turning it on with the switch. And if you were with somebody whilst they were doing that, as a carer, you might be tempted to step in and to almost take over. That's certainly was my experience anyway, sort of stepping in and trying to take over. You can help people, depending, of course, of where they are with their dementia journey, by making some adjustments in the kitchen that allows them to then be able to do that. So, for example, you might get one of those kettles that has a whistle on that goes on the hob. That means that they could make their cup of tea. Some people will find putting sort of post-it notes on cupboards to help identify where cups and tea bags and sugar and things are. That can be helpful as well. And it's having a think about what those adjustments might be that means that you can help somebody to live well with their dementia by embracing their reality at that moment in time. I've described one bookcase, and that's our factual bookcase. On the other side, as tall as I am, in my 80s, is my emotional bookcase. So again, a bookcase that's full of books, that's full of emotions and emotional memories. And those emotional memories might be when I was at school and my teacher inspired me and I had this feeling of inspiration. This bookcase is sturdier. It's made of solid oak. It's much stronger. It's much more resistant to dementia, and therefore it rocks less. And those books that come away don't come away quite as quickly or in as many, or will come away from different places. So we're going to sort of do a negative example of that and a positive example of that. The negative example of that is, just make sure I've got the right slide. Yeah. You come to visit me and we have a row because I have forgotten your name. And I might feel very angry at that, or upset and sad. And you might go away and think, well, they're going to forget about the fact I've been to visit, because we know that memory is going to come off that bookcase. And so it doesn't matter, because they're going to forget about it, and it will leave you feeling a bit ick, I'm sure. But you might be thinking, oh, they're not going to worry about it because they're going to forget. But actually, my emotions will stay there. So those feelings of sadness and anger and upset will stay on my bookcase. If we turn that around a little bit and think about an example of where you've come to visit me on a different day, we've gone out for the day, we've gone to the seaside, we've had ice cream, and it's been really, really lovely. And I'm feeling really quite loved and happy and contented. And that's on my emotional bookcase and is sitting there quite tightly. By the time we get home, and let's be honest, most of us that live in Leeds, it's 2 hours to get to the seaside. So, you know, it's a bit of a day. We've probably taken time off work, and it's been a bit of a journey to get there. But by the time we get home, that lovely day, that ice cream has been completely forgotten about. And you might think, oh, do you know, a lot of effort went into that and they've forgotten about it. And why did I do it? And I don't know that I can do that again, because that is emotionally very difficult, emotionally very draining. But whilst I might forget about the ice cream and the day out and the seagulls and listening and paddling in the sea and all of those things, I will remember feeling loved and feeling happy and contented, and that will remain with me, and I feel safe and I feel happy, and that's really important. And that's why we would encourage people to continue to visit people and to recognise that there's more to the person with dementia. My own example of this is that my mum was absolutely loved Marks and Spencer's, shareholder, loved it, would always go and visit Marks and Spencer's wherever she went. And one of our outings would be to go to the cafe, and she would have coffee and chocolate cake. And I would have a toddler as well. And for me, it was all a very, very difficult period of time, but we did it because, you know, we wanted to go out, we wanted to have a day out. It was a lovely thing to go. She was feeling happy and contented going into Marks and Spencer's. And I remember experiencing quite a few 3 a.m. phone calls of, where have you been? I haven't seen you today. You haven't come to see me, and we haven't done anything, and you know, you don't care, and all of those very highly charged emotional words and timings and things. And what I realised when I heard this was, of course, was that yes, she had forgotten that I'd been, and we'd been to Marks and Spencer's, and her face was completely lathered in chocolate cake. And who do you wipe first, the toddler or the grown up, and wiping the chocolate off and things. And that she'd completely forgotten that we'd done that. But actually, hearing this made me realise that those were really precious things for her in terms of how she felt, and she felt happy, and if she was in her place that she loved and knew and recognised and enjoyed, but she couldn't remember that we'd actually done it. So I can take some great comfort, I think, from thinking that actually, for whilst I found that really difficult for me as an individual, actually for her it was really important. It was good that we continued to do that, even though my instinct was to stop going. We did keep doing it, and actually I'm really glad that we did. But I didn't know, you know, what that would be or look like or feel like. This is a bit of an activity around right. The idea of this is that I would share with you a description of somebody, a 73-year-old person who's been diagnosed with dementia, and they were diagnosed six years ago, and they live with their partner at home. And I would be asking you questions like, so if you've got that picture in your mind of that person, to your mind, how many of these activities would they be able to do? Would they be able to make a cup of tea? Would they be able to do the ironing? Could they vote in an election, making an informed decision? Would they be able to dress themselves? Would they be able to follow the plot of a TV programme? Would they have a relationship still with their partner? Could they go to the local shop and return safely? Do they volunteer at local charity shops, serving the customers and working the till? And could they make cheese on toast on their own? And could they do a crossword puzzle? When we do this, what we find is that everybody's got a description on a piece of paper. They don't know what each other's description is. We read out these 10 statements, and then we say, how many of those apply to your person? And the range is amazing. You get some people who say, well, my person could only do 1 or 2 of those things. And some people say, well, they could do 9 or 10 or 11 of those things, you know, even more, even kind of thing. And the point is that we will all have our own interpretation of what somebody is able to do, and we make our own assumptions about what somebody is able to do. And there's no right or wrong, but actually the information you're given, and it turns out everybody's been given the same information. It's a 73-year-old person diagnosed with Alzheimer's 6 years ago, and they live with their partner in their family home. There's nothing there that tells us about had they worked in a cafe for 30 years and made cheese on toast every day, in which case potentially, you know, making that cheese on toast every day is no problem. That's okay, isn't it? Do we know anything about their partner? No, not really. They could be the main carer for their partner. You know, we do have situations where people are, you know, living together and actually almost like cross cover for one another in some ways, you know, where because they'll each have their own roles and tasks and they cross cover for one another. And it's when somebody maybe is no longer there because they've gone into hospital for something, or they've moved into a care home, that people recognize, oh, actually there may be a dementia here for this person because that other person's been covering for them in many ways. We don't know that the house is dementia friendly or not, and we don't know that whether being diagnosed 6 years ago is very helpful to our understanding either, because they could have been diagnosed very early in their disease or late in their dementia journey. And I think the point that they're trying to make is that every person is unique and everybody will experience dementia in their own way. If you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia, and that we're all, you know, and generally, as a general rule of thumb, as society, we're all very good at putting our own assumptions into something, and we will have made those decisions in that sort of like activity about what we know about others, what we've experienced, what we might be guessing, and that it's very easy actually for us, by making assumptions, to de-skill somebody or demotivate them or help them to lose their confidence, and we increase their experience of disability in that way. So however well-meaning we think we are by doing for somebody, if we could do with them, then that helps to you know, just enable them to live well, doesn't it, with their dementia. And I was very guilty of this. I was very good at doing for instead of doing with, because it was like the path of least resistance. It was easier, it was timely, it was quicker. I had a toddler to worry about, you know, there was all of these reasons for why I did it, but I recognize now that actually I could have handled that a little bit differently at certain points in our so I'm just going to go through this because I've talked it through, so I'll just move through the slides. So just in the spirit of time and making sure that we can finish on time. So yeah, we all make assumptions, don't we? And that can do. I'm going to skip through this as well. That's another activity. Those are the 5 key messages. So what can we do now? How can we turn what we've learned today into understanding and action? Or too small. There's going to be a thing at the end where you can sort of register the fact that you've become a dementia friend today. It might be that you then want to be able to put a logo on the bottom of your emails, for example, or get a pin that says that you're a dementia friend. It might be that you want to share with other people that this exists, and they might like to come and do this either in person or online somewhere. Could volunteer for an organisation that helps people with dementia. There's so many different ways in which we can do something. The Alzheimer Society at the beginning of this year changed their focus a little bit on how they were doing their campaigns, and they wanted to concentrate on research and supporting the people who look after somebody with dementia. So if you go onto their website, there's lots of information on there about what you can do to do that and support that. So yeah, let's just move on to this next one. Do you want to become a dementia friend? Understand. Here you go. It's a QR code or a text of the word friends to 82727, or you can go onto the Dementia Friends website and each of those. So a big part of this today, you are part of a social action movement that has created over 3 million dementia friends in the UK since this initiative started. And for that, we're very, very grateful for you giving up your time. I wanted to allow enough time for us to be able to chat a little bit, or maybe to ask questions. So I will draw this part to a close and stop the screen share in a moment. But just to say, there is a Dementia Connect support line through the Alzheimer Society, which people can use or access. There is a forum as well, which again can be accessed through the Alzheimer's page. And there will be local support in your area that you could also to find out about as well.